Welcome to Riting, the Post-Colonial Body. So 2021 marks the 25th anniversary of Maualaivao Albert Wendt's seminal essay, Tatauing the Postcolonial Body. In this essay, he calls for an indigenous literature that is specifically Pacific, written by the Pacific, with the Pacific, and for the Pacific. In this panel, Stacey, myself, and then Pala will explore how our own work beats, frees, and grows what Albert calls the, quote, heart, spirit, and muscle of Pacific writing. Stacey will creatively riff off Wendt's essay with a mana vavine lens, among others. I will then discuss my lead-by-line praxis, where bloodlines, written lines, and drawn lines activate the va, the interrelational space on the page. And then Pala will present his latest writing project, which explores how our bodies, their emotional anatomy, offers one of the most powerful ways of reconnecting us back to our stories, and through our stories back to ourselves. I'll share a brief bio before each speaker shares their roughly 15 to 20 minute presentations. I will commence singing at the 19-minute mark so they know to wrap up. Then we'll have chat function questions, which will be moderated by the lovely Tina Makereti. So talofa lava and welcome Stacey Kokaua, Ngati Arera o Rarotonga, Pāmati Pakeha. Stacey is a creative who lives in Parihomea in Otipoti. She completed her Master's in Creative Writing in 2019, which explored the role of rebellious young female characters in Moana literature. Her writing interests include Cook Islands identity, environmental issues in Moana Nui a Kiva, coaxing the personal from the historical, and her work has been published in Landfall, Turbine, and Pantograph Punch. Stacey divides her time between her writing and creative pursuits, her role at the Otago Polytechnic, her role with the Pacific Trust Otago, community projects within Parihomea, and the Cook Islands community of Dunedin, her permaculture garden, and her family. Welcome, Stacey.
Kia orana. Tōu iri i Ngāti Arera, ko au, ko makia arera. Arera te mimiti nui, te tū ere katuoro. E tāpiri ko pukuinu, e ēnua ko tumu te waro. E awa teitai ko mangonui, te rerianga wairua ki pō. E maunga teiuta ko tapu tārangi, arara ki te opunga. Ko au te papa, te tumu enua, kāreo e neke, e tumu o ki au no te enua. Ie koko. Kia orana koto katoa, ko Stacey tōku ingoa. And as you may have guessed, I am a proud kuki airani from Rarotonga, Palmerston, Eshel, and Aotearoa. Thank you for the introduction, Selina. I think it reminded me of, I tend to keep quite busy. Anyway, I live in Parihomea, otherwise known as Portobello, just out of Otipoti. And I'd like to thank you all for being here. Mate paki ma'ata. Today I wish to share with you a reflection I call tātātou tataanga taka, that I define as meaning our writing naked, clear, and unadorned. It's a reflection on an essay I've read a few dozen times now, and also on what provides the heart, spirit, and muscle of Pacific writing. This paper is bitsy and disjointed, just like the essay Tatauing the Postcolonial Body. And as another parallel, I was also sent an email from a friend about being on a panel that acknowledged it had been 25 years since the publication of Albert Wendt's essay. Although Albert's friend sent a letter because 25 years is ages ago. In 1996, I was 13. I had just bought my first album, a CD, Crazy Stacey Cool. I had shunned the Spice Girls. I didn't buy Girl Power for a minute because as far as I could see, I was still expected to do all of the things an eldest daughter had been asked to do since the Cook Islands' dawn of time. Instead, I was listening to TLC, Bone Thugs and Harmony, and Tony Braxton in Dunedin, of all places, where my peers were all Pākehā kids wearing Australian surf labels. It was already 2001 when I first came across Tatauing the Postcolonial Body during my undergrad in anthropology. But it's come up again over the years, most recently during my Masters of Creative Writing when I went on a Wendt bender to read up on Maualaivao. And now, here we are again. The essay, Tatauing the Postcolonial Body, begins by asking, where has the principle of uncertainty which governs reality gone to? Well, Albert, it obviously was passing 96 out at the beach house awaiting a triumphant return in 2020, although 2021 has also been a great year for the principle of uncertainty. And I only anticipate big things to come for the principle of uncertainty in 2022. Wendt's reflection on buzzwords in the essay is still so relevant. In fact, social media has made buzzwords extremely mainstream. Had anyone even used the word well-being before 2010? And then there's also the term sustainability, like we're pretending any work around sustainability isn't actually about survival as a species. I'm sure there are more terms that can be unpacked depending on your field with adequate amounts of originality, cleverness, weightiness, and trendiness. I myself am out of the academic lane for the moment, so I couldn't possibly comment, although I do hope we have moved past the term post-colonial. Now, here's the thing. I am going to do the same thing in this talk as Wendt does in his essay and switch from a flippant takedown of academia and the conference circuit and shift into a discussion of the cultural understanding of nakedness. Hear me out. I won't even use subtitles for ease of reading because this is a panel and I am a creative writer. Wendt takes one small step beyond a metaphor to describe the post-colonial body as an actual human body lying before him. Here he reveals his subjectivity as a Samoan male. He gives a description of two Samoan terms for nakedness, talenoa, meaning without sacredness, and talifua, meaning without measure. Now, when other Pacific cultures unpack terms, I am predisposed to draw contrast with my own culture, Cook Islands, specifically Rarotonga. We have the adjective or noun for naked or nakedness, and that term is taka or takataka. It means naked, but it can also mean something being made clear or distinct. For example, the phrase ko taka toko manako means my thoughts, literally, my thoughts have become clear, but it implies my mind is made up. Takataka can also mean plain, as in without embellishment or adornment. For example, taro takataka is plain taro, meaning you're eating it without coconut cream or onions or anything. Approached in this way, the term takataka in Māori o Rarotonga implies that seeing someone or something naked, seeing that same person or thing clearly as they are in their entirety and without adornment. So to conjure up a naked body in this sense, as Wendt does, implies knowing something clearly and in its entirety. And in 1996, Albert Wendt knew about the post-colonial body, enough to be confident he could approach that body and use his unimaginative imagination to tatau on it. This phrase further reinforces that for Wendt, the body is Samoan and male. Even when discussing the etymology of the terms tatau for men and malu for women, tatau is broken down in 5 different ways, and malu is given the definition only to be shaded or to be protected. In Māori o Rarotonga, we share the same definitions for tatau, so there's no need for me to unpack that, although I will say that tā tatau is used as a term for work on the bodies of males, females, non-binaries, akapaine, and so on. But malu or maru, as we would say in Māori, is a term that I will interpret more widely. And this is because I use the term maru every day. When I put my 2 children to sleep, I give each a kiss, a hug, and I fix their blankets up around their chin, even now in December, because we live in Dunedin. And I give them ideas for dreams, such as riding unicorns over rainbows, and floating in little whaka in a glittery ocean, and being a baby Ewok with your family in the Tree Hut village. Although, as a side, I know that a baby Ewok is called a Wokling. I'm just trying to make this work accessible. And after all this, I turn off the light, I pause at the door, and I say, "Ina maro o ia korua, moi maru." I love you both. Have a maru sleep. As Albert suggests for the Samoan term malu, maru can mean shaded and protected, and it can also mean dark and dusky. In Māori, it can also mean soft and gentle, meek and well-intentioned. In fact, the first part of Psalm 37, verse 11 says, "Ka reka te aronga maru rā, ka noo ia I te inua." The maru will inherit the earth. So in the spirit of Albert Wendt's essay, let me now just flex my own subjectivity by saying Cook Islanders love a good song about lovers in that dusky, dark, shadowy space. And so many of them are set on a beach, on a warm night. Iraro I te tūmunu, under the coconut grove. In fact, this love song was used by Tokelau Wilson, a Cook Islands visual artist. Tokelau's work always challenges me about what it means to be a Cook Islands creative in Aotearoa. However, this particular work was a series of drawings that was displayed in Otepoti during Matariki, and it really stayed with me. The images were created in really gestural black ink on white paper. And one that really stood out for me was of a man carrying a large fish held over his shoulder. They showed other ways of looking and being under that coconut grove. Iraro I te tūmunu. And that's the power of seeing your own people's work, reading your own people's writing. You share these secret messages and you're provided with extra layers of meaning. And so I heard this song in my head going on about the gentle sound of the guitar and being with a lover under the coconut grove while I stared into the ominous tones of these artworks. And this is also the nuanced way of darkness. Te malu. It can be romantic or sordid, gentle or foreboding. Either way, we are stripped bare. Taka taka. Te maru, shade, protection, shelter, shadow. Te pō, darkness, night, blindness. Existence before creation, where the gods dwell. And is there anything more sacred than the dark? Anything more capable of stripping us to our unembellished, unadulterated selves. Ai, te takamaitaki nei te tangata, I roto I te pō. That way that the dark causes our pupils to dilate, to hear every sound around us, including our own breath, the heartbeat of a lover. Which brings me to my ultimate act of subjectivity. As a kukiairani, as a woman, as a mother, I ascribe something to the body of Pacific writing, the most sacred of dark spaces, home of darkness, ripe with potential, life-giving and terrifying, the creator and connector of Enua, the womb. Wendt described the body as a body becoming, akataka iaia, te kōpapa. But I suggest the body is also a layer, an akapapaanga of our literature, born from tūpuna, like Albert Wendt himself, but also with a womb filled with terrifying potential. From writing ancestry, the body, te kōpapa, moves through the world, knowing their mokopuna will be part of what is yet to come. That what will emerge will be gentle, terrifying, ripe with potential, and unafraid to stand naked, distinguished, and unadorned. Tā tātou, tataanga, taka. All right. And that is the end of my part of this panel. I'll hand it back to Selina. And I believe we'll have questions at the end, opportunity for questions at the end. But thank you for listening.
Sorry, Selina, can you please just request your audio and video again? Thanks.
Stacey, that was marvelous. Thank you. I'm next. I won't read out my own bio. It's in the program. Suffice it to say that my latest work has been creating a mop head series, a graphic mini memoir series, and I'm currently working on Mop Head Knot Book 3, KNOT Book 3, How to Untie Your Knots with Creative Writing. So I am going to endeavour to share my screen and I'm not too sure if it's going to work. Okay, it won't let me. So maybe Stacey might put on my PowerPoint. If not, I shall just hopefully imagine. I just can't seem to. Window. No, can't see the PowerPoint. All right, I'm just going to speak and hopefully, actually, I've got one of the mop heads here, so I will. I began drawing Mop Head, a graphic all ages memoir, to tell the story of how I went from being teased as a mop head for my too big hair at school to becoming the New Zealand Poet Laureate in 2017. I was the 11th laureate, the 5th woman, and the first person of Pacific descent to hold the post. Published at the end of my Poet Laureate tenure in 2019, it took everyone by surprise, most of all me, and to sing of the sweetness of my own moppy sweet potato, Mophead took the Children and Young People's Literature Awards by storm, making a near clean sweep of the awards, including Best Book Design and Best Book Cover, and took out the Margaret Mahy Supreme Book Award. The specifically Pacific story of how your difference makes a difference hit a universal chord. Pacific peoples related to the bloodlines in the story. Mophead is Afakasi, the Samoan transliteration of the word half caste. For some Samoans, many like Albert Wendt and of the older generation, the word half caste and its numerous iterations smacks of racist colonial policies that privileged some and discriminated against others, especially with regards to their access to political power, land and education, according to imposed blood quantum metrics. Subsequent generations of Pacific Islanders have reclaimed the term Afakasi and its other iterations. Afa, not just meaning half, but also meaning rope. Kasi, not just meaning caste, but also one. That is, we are of one rope woven with many strands, many bloodlines. So Afakasi is now commonly used to embrace multiple cultural bloodlines. As a poet, I pay attention to words and the worlds they offer up. As a Pacific person, I pay a special attention to names. My grandfather's name, Tusitala, is a case in point, Tusitala. There are so many worlds within that one word. If we start at the beginning, we see a juxtaposition of meaning and motion, avoiding any easy confinement of definition. Tu means to stand in many Polynesian languages. Tu, hedged up right next to it, is the English word sit. I stand, I sit. My official poet laureate portrait eschews the usual standing or seated on a chair positioning. I told the photographer I would sit cross-legged on the floor, holding the toko, the carved laureate walking, talking staff. And instead of looking directly at the camera, I would be looking up and slightly behind me. This is a very Pacific body language of learning and of teaching. Humility is the beginning of the learning-teaching dynamic. Looking slightly up and behind follows the bloodline wisdom evident in many Pacific cultures. We face the future with our backs. We bring our ancestors with us. The first four letters of Tusitala then is the word tusi, T-U-S-I. It means to scribe, to write, to tap, 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 to story. It also means book. The second part of the word, T-A-L-A, tala, means to tell. Tusitala is the Samoan word for storyteller, or more accurately, teller of tales. It's purported that Robert Louis Stevenson, the canonical Scottish author, was given the name Tusitala by Samoan chiefs to mark his status as a renowned teller of tales. And Stevenson lived and died the last years of his life in Samoa. He was also a firm supporter of Samoan independence from an inept New Zealand colonial administration. For his political support of Samoan independence, he was well loved. When Stevenson died from tuberculosis complications in 1894, at the age of 44, Samoans came from all over the islands to help cut a path through the thick tropical forest to the top of Mount Vaia, part of his estate, and where he wished to be buried. This was no mean feat at 472 meters above sea level. The path is called Oleala Lealofa, the path of love. Ala, A-L-A, forms the last three letters of Tusitala. Ala means path, bridge, trail. It has been for me the way, the path, the bridge to story, and the way of the line as I've chosen these past few years to be consciously led by line. Tusitala, my grandfather's name, provides the Samoan and Tuvaluan bloodlines that direct the written lines formed by paying close attention to the word itself. Its many composite parts open up cultural portals into my world and the how of me as a Tusitala, as a teller of tales. In the Mophead memoirs, I follow the drawn line. In the sequel, Mophead 2, TU, the Queen's poem, my alter ego Mophead is tasked with writing and performing a poem for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She has 5 rules that she must abide by. Mophead must find a way to serve her own people who were formerly colonized by the British Empire and to serve the Queen as the 2016 Commonwealth poet. Mophead must find a way to stand with integrity, which Mophead's own alter ego, Mini Mophead, defines as, quote, when your insides match your outsides. 2, TU, the first 2 letters of her name, provide the cultural portal to explore the answers that lie within her bloodline and within herself. In the middle of Tusitala is I. I stand in the middle of Tusi, the writing, and Tala, the telling. Mophead figures out how to radically stand in her I to bridge her writing and telling, her scribing and telling. And this is what I called a led by line praxis. With regards to Pacific literature, to reading it, to writing it, I've developed something called the Tusitala Way as a framework for critiquing Pacific literature, and one that self-reflexively positions the I in relation to the material, and then follows the bloodline, the written line, and the drawn line as presented in the text. It's based on the premise that critique means not just examining by pulling apart and fault finding, but also pulling together and making, specifically making something new, or to play on the homonym in Samoan, making something N-I-U, new. The new is the word for the Pacific's tree of life, the coconut palm. It's the tree of life because all its parts give life and are used for food, drink, garment, utensils, and shelter. I've applied the Tusitala Way to one of Albert Wendt's early novels, Bo'uliuli, published in 1977. Bo'uliuli means darkness and refers to an existential void. I take his original pages and proceed to black them out and pull out other voices, hidden voices in the text. Another play on the homonym nu is in the past tense of know, the verb knew. I use it to point to what we knew, the stories and myths we knew, which used to inform our knowing as carried through the bloodline. A few months ago, I made up a composite word that captures the sense of knowing what we once knew and making something new. The word is epistemology, and on the PowerPoint it kind of explodes on the page, but epistemology, my restory term, is comprised of the Greek words episteme, to mean knowledge, logos, reason and speech, and mythos, story. I use epistemology to describe emotionally literate and creative ways of knowing, understanding, and reasoning by restoring our myths to restore the Va, the VA, what Samoans philosophize as the interrelational spaces between people, beings, and places. Or to put it another way, epistemology is about ancient stories and infusing them into our contemporary ways of being. In Moped 2, the Queen's poem, I draw upon 4 Pacific gods and goddesses who point the way to help Moped figure out how to or stand as an ala, a bridge between her people and the Queen and her beehive of an empire. So, 25 years after Wendt's call for Pacific literature to, quote, be a body coming out of the Pacific, not a body being imposed on the Pacific, a blend, a new development, which I consider to be in heart, spirit, and muscle Pacific. How far have we come? I contend that rather than coming far, we've gone deeper within. And readers of all cultures and creeds are responding. More of us are telling stories led by lines, writing from within an epistemological approach that enables our insides to match our outsides. So to continue the theme of reconnecting to our stories, I want to welcome our final panelist, Pala Molisa. Pala is a Pacific academic from Vanuatu. He was a lecturer in accounting at Victoria University for 15 years. In 2018, he left university to take a self-imposed sabbatical to retrain in emotional anatomy and became a self-alignment coach. He's passionate about the interconnection between spirituality and social and ecological well-being. He currently teaches business, leadership, and sports in prison, using these disciplines to help students develop their own self-awareness of the body-mind connection, and more importantly, who they are. Welcome, Pala.
Oh, kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thanks a lot, Selina. Mende looks have atua lu plesia, looks all whenua, ol rangatira, metem ol whānau bliumi. Thanks so much for the invitation too, Tina. Just want to acknowledge all your hard work in bringing the panel together. And I really appreciate your invitation too for me to come share some of my ideas and thoughts in the panel. When Stacey, Selina and I started thinking about how to come up with the underlying theme for the panel, and we settled on Albert Wendt's seminal essay, Tatauing the Postcolonial Body. I really loved the topic because it aligned with a lot of the some of the other themes I've been thinking about. Oh, thanks, Jacinta. Oh, let's just do that. Yeah. Oh, I'll just give a second for the screen to load again. But yeah, what I love that idea of thinking about how we can rewrite the post-colonial body in these different ways. You can see from the screen title there, we're playing around with that idea of not just writing the written word, but writing in the sense of claiming back our rights, and also putting things right. Hey, and when we talk about things like the decolonization process, re-indigenization process, and just the basic thing of figuring out ways of how to reclaim our health and well-being at the individual level and in our communities as well. Albert's piece has so many beautiful motifs in there that for me are really productive anchors to start thinking through some of these issues. And Jacinta, if you could go to, yeah, those are my deets there. But maybe down to the questions. Yeah, I think the next slide, Jacinta. Yep, that's the one. Oh. Where's my slides gone? Yeah, no, that's the one. Yeah, thanks, Jacinta. The Albert's piece for me is really important in thinking through how Pacific literature could help contribute to the health and well-being of our communities for this simple reason. When I left university 3 years ago now, 2019, I with more time on my hands, I started thinking about what stories do I want to write. And one of the things I quickly came to as well is once I started looking at, once I retrained as a psychosomatic therapist, and psychosomatics is basically therapy that looks specifically at the mind-body connection, because that's really one of the things that offers one of the beautiful bridges between our indigenous spiritual traditions and healing traditions and some of the more holistic traditions within the West. Because most of the Western epistemologies and most of the Western healing traditions, they're still based on that belief in the disconnection between mind and body. You know, you look at mainstream medical science, you look at mainstream medicine, you look at even the mainstream education system, like in the universities, unless you consciously push back and seek to create spaces where the learning is integrated and that mind-body connection is acknowledged, the default position is always the belief that mind and body are separate, and we can take that split even further to start thinking about the split between, say, the individual and papatuanuku, wider nature. And once you start looking in that field of psychosomatics, one of the things that we, and Stacey brought this up in her and Whakaaro as well, that idea that our stories aren't just words that we write down in text or that we even speak. Our stories are literally written on our physical bodies. So one of the most important questions that I've been thinking through is that idea of what stories are we already living? And you can actually bring those stories up if you pay attention to the body. We can pay attention to text, to literature. We can pay attention to words, but even just looking at our physical bodies. And I started thinking about this in terms of Tatau too, because if we thought about Tatau like back home with our own traditions from Ambai, it's a way of surfacing personal qualities and traits given our whakapapa that are latent, that are inside of us, and providing us symbolic anchors for us to bring those qualities through, to find them, to develop them, and then to bring them through, but by the way we live and through the work that we do. So thinking about, from a psychosomatics point of view, thinking about what stories are we already living, that's a really important one in terms of health and well-being, because the basic principle is this: we get stressed not because of the actual situation, not because of the reality of life. We get stressed, and often chronically stressed, because of the stories that we keep holding on to, especially the unquestioned stories, the stories based on unquestioned assumptions and unquestioned beliefs. And again, going back to the body, whether it's using traditional means like the Tao and looking at the symbology of that, or even just looking at the physiology, the basic physical form, structure, shape, function of our bodies tells us everything. Because this body is kind of like it's like an all-powerful computer that registers everything. Yeah. So all our beautiful experiences, all our gifts and talents, all our strengths, body registers that. All our emotional blockages, our avoidance patterns, and the chronic stresses that come from that avoidance, body registers that too. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm thinking through at the moment. Thinking through some of the ways in which the deep emotional literacy of the body can actually be used to restore the way we think about ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves. Yeah, and thinking about ways how we can bring that through on the page as well. And on this particular slide here, I've just got Selina and I actually did a collaborative piece. The PowerPoint's a bit small, but it's a story from back home in Vanlove. And it's we've called it, it's kind of like a modern take on an old story, but it's called Tegel Marai and the Boy Who Remembered. Tegel Marai is our river god. He's an eel, a black eel from Vanlove. And what we used that story to do is we played around with thinking about how we could use the emotional literacy principles that we can take from, say, therapeutic traditions like emotional anatomy, and to see how our stories have already got them in there, and to figure out ways of how we can reweave them and think about them in ways that are empowering for people who read these stories and use these stories, like our kids. So that last half of the title, The Boy Who Remembered, it's that idea that when the basic gist of the story is when the community started forgetting the sacred names of Tegel Marai, the eel god, it wasn't just Tegel Marai who suffered. The river ended up suffering, and the land ended up suffering and dying, and the community also ended up suffering. So it's making that link between memory, cultural recollection, and cultural restoring. Yeah, so that's kind of one aspect I wanted to share for my bit in the session. The other one too is just going to that second question on the page there. When we think about how do we develop stories that empower ourselves, and Jacinta, if you could just go to the next, I don't know if it's the next slide or the next couple, no, next one. And I think the last one after that, just, yeah, that's the, yeah, takeaways. Perfect. It's this is something that I'm using to inform the book that I'm writing, an emotional anatomy book at the moment, looking at how our stories are literally written through our bodies, and also looking at, that's one of the things I love with looking at the mind-body connection too, because it gets away from that Western paradigm that tends to bracket our stories as, you know, quote unquote myths and legends. When we understand things like, no, whakapapa is literally, it's not just a physiological thing or a genetic thing. There's layers that include the energetic layer and the spiritual layer that links us back to Atua. Those spiritual dimensions come through our bodies, and one of the ways it comes through, for instance, it is that the archetypal forces, the archetypal personas that characterizes our Atua, our ancestors, our tupuna, they come through not just our bodies, but also our lives as well. So by going back to our bodies and actually paying closer attention to what's actually there, why is my knee bung? Why is it the left knee that's bung? What is that actually saying about the stuff that's going on in my life? What's that stuff saying about the choices that I've been making, the habitual patterns that I maybe haven't looked close enough at? But yeah, I think I'll wrap up there, Selina. I want to give a lot of time for questions and stuff, but yeah, hopefully what I've shared gives a bit of a gist, enough of a gist of some of the ways we can use seminal anchor points like Albert's Tatauing the Postcolonial Body to rethink the future directions that our own Pacific writings can take going forward.
If our panelists could please request to come and join the conversation again, we'll be able to start question time.
Thanks, Paula, and welcome back to Stacey. And we thought that because it's a panel, we'd quite like some free discussion amongst ourselves and with anyone who's got any interesting questions. I noticed that you didn't use the term epistemological, Paula. Like that's exactly what we were doing in that Gamarai story.
There's so much stuff going on there. My bad.
Yeah, that term too. You forgot to send me the memo about that term too, Selina.
Hey, if my PowerPoint had worked, you would have seen that your name was up there, and yeah, no.
So many beautiful kōrero, and I was trying to take notes and also trying to do moderation type activities, so I'm going to have to come back and listen again. And when is that book due, Paula? Because I would like it now, preferably. But also, please send through your questions to the chat or the Q&A. Is it, maybe you can lead, Selina? I'm just wondering if you can, three of you can talk about connections. I mean, obviously the connections are there, but if you can make some of those links between the work the three of you are doing together, or what came up for each of you listening to the other people on the panel, just while we're waiting for some questions to come through.
Well, I actually really enjoyed, Stacey, your focus on the malu and Albert's early work, that his 1977 novel Po'olioli, it was criticised by one of our first kind of Western educated Pacific feminists for being sexist and for burying women's voices and for covering up their power. And so I took that a first edition of his novel and used blackout poetry technique to bring out the women's voices. So the women are speaking and they're reclaiming their power as manawahine and as mothers, as daughters, as aunties, and as women. And that was a way for me to kind of apply a Tusitala way and to make my way through a space that seemed quite dead, like that was Arlene Griffin, you know, a Fiji-based Indo-Fijian feminist critic, and I was kind of caught between beautiful Arlene and her work and my elder Albert, and trying to figure out how to stand between those two. So your focus on malu does a similar thing with that essay, because you you know, you see that it's got a particular gender focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also looked at in my masters. I looked at Po'uliuli as a kind of way to explore how Albert used the va to set up characters in a way that only Pacific readers could really connect with. But yes, I did read about that the different types of reception that it received. But yeah, I think what stood out for me most about that work is that it was initially received as a type of anthropological work through which Pākehā readers could learn more about Samoan culture. And I would suspect that that is not what Albert Wendt intended for that work. But yeah, I think, you know, with that title, Po'uliuli, it kind of started for me, this exploration of darkness. And I also saw something by Tina, do you remember that Conch conference? I was way back. I had Tusitala, Tusiata Avia, and Nina Ngāwalawa.
Right. In Christchurch.
Nah, Wellington. Oh God.
Oh yes, I do. Yeah,
It was
yeah.
an
It
ancient
was
times.
right.
And
Yeah.
so Nina had done this work with a Fijian woman who had experienced domestic violence. So it was a theatre production. And she spoke about how they used theatre lighting and they just projected small areas of light on the stage. And the woman kind of congregated on the outside of that light so that they could bring their hands forward in their own time. And she spoke about the darkness as, in that sense, being shelter as well. And I think that's it's a theme that kind of comes up across Pacific literature and arts, is this idea of a nuanced space of darkness, where darkness doesn't exist just as a contrast to light. Darkness has its own role in our well-being, you know. And I think, Pala, you would probably agree that, like, we need darkness, we need rest, we need space to repair. And yeah, that's a theme that I'm increasingly interested in. And I think it's also quite tied to the feminine and yeah, that life-giving space as well.
Do you want to speak to that, Pala? And then we've got a couple of questions on the chat that I'll bring up.
Yeah, sure. Not totally agree, Stacey. That, I mean, in some ways, that's why I left uni back in 3 years ago. It was to get more time. And in terms of that darkness, I basically went bush, pulled out of just about everything. You know, it was just family, but activism, work, academia. Yeah, I just went and found some big Kokaua and sat under that for a good year and a half. And then that's when things started flowing again. And I just see April Rose, you guys can talk to these other questions too. But that whole thing of having writing blocks, towards just before I left uni, nothing was coming out. It's because my whole system had already left. I wasn't leaving. I was still holding on, going, oh, should I? But yeah, let's put it in this current context too, with like COVID. Like, this is such a huge worldwide disruption of life as we knew it. There's so much stuff going on, so much stuff that the government's not even talking about, right? Like our economy's being completely trashed. So in terms of darkness, like if we talk about it symbolically, there's a lot of stuff going on there too. But again, the thing I find uplifting is it's also a way for us to, it's also an opportunity for us to think about how we can reframe this current COVID crisis in a way that's empowering. Like in a lot of ways, this COVID crisis is colonization 4.0, and hardly anyone in government is talking about the technological and financial restructurings that are going on here, right? So, you know, like I'd say that too. That yeah, darkness is important, and it's important to think about how it applies in the present, not just in a spiritual sense, but like everything spiritual. I'm not saying there's a disconnect, but also in concrete political and economic terms.
Kia ora. So I'll start with Alice Tapunga Somerville's question. Kia ora, great kōrero. I was thinking about the post-colonial body and the post-colonial whenua. How do you think about the many connections between Pacific bodies and whenua Māori? I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I was reading a PhD thesis by a good friend, and yeah, my taina from another kainga, Dr. Eva Powell. And it talks about the power of bearing our pito, and how the increasing number of Pacific inua and pito, you know, our placenta, are being buried here in this land, and how that binds us to this land, even when our papaanga is linked to places elsewhere. And I think now that our people have been in this country a number of decades, and our confidence in our identity here grows, I think we're ready to start dialogue about what it means to be part of this place, but also linked to our islands in the Pacific.
Yeah, I think of my, I've got 3 older half brothers from Dad's first marriage to, and they're Māori, and my own connection with them, which has been mediated actually through literature, through me sharing books by, and years ago, you know, books by Witi Ihamaira, because they were completely disconnected from their marae, and it provided a really beautiful, gentle way for me to say, bro, you know, you're part of me, and this is part of you, and here's Witi and here's Patricia. And that was, you know, 15 years ago, and didn't really get too much response, but from their kids, they've come back and they're quite interested in my own connection with Māori through storytelling and through stories. So in a way, it's provided them, urban Māori, with a relatively safe space that they're not going to feel judged, that they can discuss stuff with their auntie about through story.
Just quickly, Tina, like with Alice's question of that connection between Pacific bodies and whenua Māori, like we can, one area I think about that for me is quite obvious is just all the relationships that we've built now in the present day between, you know, so many of our kids are mixed, that side of things. But in terms of literature, storytelling, telling our own stories for today, the thing that I'm really excited about, and I'd love to, you know, to connect with people who are thinking about these things too. So we've got official history, right? We've got official history. We've got our own stories with our own hapu and whānau, right? From across the Pacific, and including here in Aotearoa. and then there's kind of like this in between space where, like, I'll give you an example. If you look at, say, the Journal of the Polynesian Society, when these white fellas came in and started documenting everything by, you know, whoever they chatted to, and they started writing the stuff down, the stories there, like there's filtering involved, that we got to do the work of close reading and questioning. Here's the thing that really excites me though, like for instance, Patu Paiarahi, the white skin, dark-eyed, blue-eyed, yeah, right? Not just that, like when I think about some of the stories from that, when I read and talk to some of the people down south, right? Kaitahu, and these stories of tribes, peoples that look exactly like this, clearly like this, right? Like for me, again, it's that thing. Why are we accepting that? Like, I'm not saying everyone's doing this. I'm saying the pattern in academia. We tend to bracket these stories as quote unquote myth and legend rather than real history. If we're talking about whakapapa, we link to these. Like, these aren't, it's not, these aren't myths in the Palangi, Pakia sense. This is our history. Where are they? Where are they? What happened to them? Where do they go? Are they still here? Of course they're still here. But are we, you know, are we doing enough work of developing the eyes to see this stuff and to figure out ways of reintegrating? Like, I'm talking as Ni Vanuatu. I got whakapapa here, a whakapapa to here, right? Waitaha, right? That, like, a whakapapa, like, we got connections with everyone, right? But it's literature. We can, for me, the power of literature is also figuring out beautiful, creative ways of bringing these stories back and retelling it in our own voices of today.
You're freaking me out a bit, Pala, because I've just written an essay in which someone from the Journal of the Polynesian Society is talking to my tūpuna, to my ancestor, and he's talking about Patu Paiarehe. I just, just like,
Right.
whoa. Okay. Hello, tūpuna. So the other question on here, great question. Can you recall a particular barrier you have faced in your writing, and how did you work through it? Oh, well, we've only got 10 minutes left, but go.
That's one of, I've got just under 2,000 naughty questions from kids up and down Aotearoa, New Zealand. They ask Dr. Mophead storytelling naughty questions, and they often kind of spill over into the personal. But one of the most commonly asked questions is, how do you unblock yourself? And so with the drawn line, I've written Mophead with a toilet plunger, and I talk about unblocking through the push and pull of that material, and being able to flush it out with by introducing new material, you know, and always being open. So whether you're reading, well, whether I'm reading, whether I move from the written line to the drawn line to help me unblock, that's often a really good process, because most of us doodle and draw. The worst thing I can do is just to kind of sit there going, I'm blocked, you know. The best thing I can do is to move my body, to move my mind. And also, you know, on Pala's slide, there was something about how the stories are within us. They're right here rather than out there. And so paying attention to what is right here and honoring that, and those small micro experiences that often kind of get thrown up in journal writing, for example. Like I practice Julia Cameron's morning pages every morning to help flush out that internal censor, to kind of figure out what it is that I'm thinking and how I'm thinking about issues. So that's how I kind of flush out the blocked loo knot, I've called it. So, Stacey?
I think the biggest barrier for me right now is the amount of work that is being asked of me in other areas. So, for example, like I have 2 children, and I want to make sure I maintain connection with them, but also with the Cook Islands community. We have so many demands put on us by like the fact that there's so much inequity in New Zealand. So we're constantly having to advocate for our communities to have basics, but also like from outside the community, where as it's kind of in vogue now to have Pacific elements to stuff. And so we get approached by so many different external stakeholders wanting a piece of what we're doing. And that doesn't necessarily serve our communities. So I end up, like, my dream is to be able to sit in my house and write sci-fi, but I have so much other stuff going on. I feel guilt, about making the space to do my writing. So there's always stuff bouncing around that I have a compulsive need almost to get on paper. But it's making that space as a Cook Islands woman to for myself, and even participating in something like this is really about me pushing out space in my life so that I can be engaged with things like this, because this is outside of my work with the community and paid role and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's the biggest barrier for me.
It's so demanding, isn't it, in that we need that space. And I'm thinking again about what stress does to our body, or what having stories that remain unwritten does to our bodies. And then there's all of us, I know all of us, because even bringing this conference together, it was just like, I know what the demands on every single Māori Pacific Indigenous person are that come from their community and their families, and then to ask people to come in here. But I also know that this feeds us. So, Ala.
Hi.
Did you have any comments, Ala, about that question?
Which one? The blocks?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's an energetic thing, Like blocks are hardly ever intellectual blocks. They're almost always emotional blocks of one sort or another. And sometimes just getting outside, moving the body, doing something physical is enough. But like I'm thinking about in my own coaching therapy work, it's often it's going back to our stories and seeing and asking that question: what story is living through me right now that I'm not looking, that I'm not paying attention to enough to, yeah. And again, I use that example often of leaving uni. I could have probably have left 2-3 years earlier, but I kept on holding on. And the body starts stagnating. Hey, if your system's already gone, hey, but you're still here. Like, and then stuff starts popping off, starts turning bad. So emotional blocks, the therapeutic principle is health, and life is healthy when life flows. So the very fact, and blockages aren't bad. Blockages are more, hey, it's more your life saying and your body saying, hey, pay attention to me. It's an attention thing.
Just in my moment of vulnerability, as I was biking to get online here, one of the reasons that I've been blocked with Moped Not Boxing is like the thought came up as I was biking, oh, you've already done your best work. You've already, it's there's nothing else, right? Nothing else is going to live up to that. And just to be able to stare that thought in the face and tell it to take a hike, you know, well, that's part of the process, right? So to replace that thought with, no, the best is yet to come, it's going to be different because I'm different energetically as well. Yeah. And that only came through biking, and I've been holding onto that for months.
We've got one more question that's for you specifically, Stacey, but I'm thinking that we might run out of time, and I want you to have a moment to close in whatever way you wanted to close. I don't know, it's from April Rose Gears, and maybe you can look at the chat. And I think there's somewhere on here where people can talk directly. Yeah, and that's just a message from Jacinta. So shall he mihi nui, kia koutou mō tēnei kōrero. Do you have any closing words?
Just that our myths and stories, they contain our ancestral wisdom, but they're also ours to dynamically re-story and make true to, you know, make them reflect something true of our lives now and today. And working on the water book with Pala on the Gaumarai and the boy who remembered really illustrated that to me, that's what our stories are for, is to feed us now and here. That's my parting words.
Stacey?
No, I just want to thank everyone for listening and giving me this space. Mei taki mata.
No parting words. Just thanks again, Tina, and yeah, thanks to everyone who came along and shared their thoughts. Thanks very much.
Yeah, my thanks to everyone. So, Modi order, and we will close the session.